The question is around the Community Safety Initiative Fund. What future does it have? Obviously, it's in its kind of infancy, but could you kind of lay out kind of its future over the next 2 to 3 years?
My priority as Minister for Justice is to build stronger, safer communities, to make sure that people are safe, that they feel safe in their communities, that they can contribute to feeling safe in their communities as well, because it is the people who live in an area who know best what it is that their community needs. I'm delighted to confirm that under budget 2024, €7.9 million will be allocated towards community safety initiatives, 3.7 million for the Community Safety Innovation Fund, so that's an increase on last year's of almost €1 million. The funding recognises again that local communities need to be involved in designing and prioritising the appropriate types of solutions in their own areas. I established the Community Safety Innovation Fund in just April of 2021 with the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform to allow proceeds of crime, essentially money that has been taken off criminals, to be directly put back into communities that they are impacting. The funds reflect the success, I think, of An Garda Síochána. They reflect the success of the Criminal Assets Bureau in identifying and seizing these gains of criminals, and CAB are working closely with Gardaí and all enforcement agencies in targeting these types of assets and making sure that we do even more work in that regard. 22 community projects across the country benefited from grants in the first round. It was ranging from projects everywhere from 5,000 to 150,000 in last year's allocation. These included, not in but near to your area, where I know it is providing assistance, €135,000 to the Walkinstown Green Hills Resource Centre. They're developing supportive interventions for young people at risk of drug use. You had 136,000 for the That's a Wrap project run by Family Base, where they are supporting again marginalised young people through assertive outreach in Ballyfermot, but also in the wider surrounding areas as well. We opened up a call for funding in March of 2023, and I really hope to be in a position in the very near future to be able to announce that funding call. It was open for 8 weeks, and what we need to do every year now, because this is a fund that will continue, that will expand, that will grow, and very much support the community safety partnerships which will be stood up next year to replace the joint policing committees. What we need to make sure is that people understand the fund, that they're putting in projects that are new, that are innovative, but above all that we can see these projects expand, and where they work in one place, if they can be replicated in other areas, that's very much a part of what we want to happen here.
Thanks, Minister, and it's welcome that there's extra funding in relation to this initiative. My only criticism is that I think it's not targeted as it should be, where areas that have been kind of subjected to kind of criminal activity in relation to these gangs, you will find that areas of deprivation where this kind of manifests, I think it should be a bit more targeted in relation to them particular areas. But it is welcome. It does throw up another question: why these initiatives and projects are not actually funded directly by central government rather than the proceeds of crime? But I'd like you to comment on that particular question.
Well, I suppose, Deputy, the proceeds of crime money comes directly back into the Exchequer, and a decision was taken that this money should then be ring-fenced and spent, been put directly back into communities, and we have increased it year on year. It started at 2, it went up to 3, it's now almost at 4 million, and my anticipation and my hope is that that will continue to grow. I think with any new funding stream, particularly where we're looking for new and innovative projects, there's a body of work that we need to continue doing in making sure that people know about it, that we highlight it, that we engage with communities to make sure that they put in projects that will fit the criteria here, because what I don't want to do is replicate funding streams coming from other departments. So what we've seen in some of the applications is where people maybe haven't received funding for a particular project or a worker in other departments, that they then put it in this fund, and obviously that's not what we're talking about here. We want to look at new and innovative solutions to community safety, and I mentioned 2 there, but you have another fantastic project which was specifically focused on domestic violence in rural areas, and it allows for the domestic violence services working with other arms of the law, but also with the domestic violence services locally, to link in with the Gardaí and to create a structure that doesn't already exist, to be able to reach out to people in rural communities. And if we could get that replicated across the country, wouldn't that be fantastic, to see how one person's solution here could actually help many, many other people? So there's a body of work to do to make sure that people know about it, that we continue to increase the funding, and that we can expand out on the various different projects that are successful.
probably kind of a bigger question. I'm not sure you'll be able to answer in a minute, but to really undercut criminal gangs in this country, because largely criminal gangs, their profiteering and how they generate money is essentially through the drug industry. That's essentially, I mean, robbing banks for criminal gangs is probably a yesterday's kind of activity. So generally they generate enormous amounts of money by the drug industry. And I think it's ironic that we have in the state a system called the Misuse of Drugs Act, which are the drugs that these gangs essentially controlled, but we don't have any control at all. These are controlled drugs, essentially controlled by criminal gangs. And I think we have to have a long discussion, and it's obviously going through the Citizens' Assembly at the moment, to undercut the drug industry, to basically to regulate drugs, to regulate certain drugs, and to kind of generate any revenues that comes from them away from the black market into a system where it's regulation, because we will have this perpetual cycle of criminality, but generally it's generated and run for the profits of drugs, and we can't get away from that, and I think we need to kind of undercut that.
Thank you, Deputy.
Look, it's hard to respond in a minute, but I think it's fair to say there are many reasons that people might feel safe or unsafe in their communities. You know, it might be that you're a victim of domestic abuse and you're simply not safe in your own home. It might be that there's antisocial behaviour, or you're an elderly person and you don't feel safe. But it is also the impact of criminal organisations, organised crime groups, where many of them, yes, are connected to drug dealing. The impact that has on communities is absolutely devastating. And there are a number of ways in which we need to respond. We need to make sure that we have that visible Garda presence and those specialist teams that are in communities able to respond and support communities on the ground, that they're able to deal with taking major criminals out of the work that they're doing, making sure that we are able to seize the significant amount of drugs that are coming into our community. But the topic that you mentioned obviously is up for discussion at the moment, and they're concluding their work, the Citizens' Assembly, looking at possible other ways in which we can respond to the issue of drug use or misuse and addiction as well in particular. So there are many ways in which we can support communities and making people feel safe, and it's about not focusing on one single approach. Just finally, I mean, the work of CAB and the work that they do in taking away the ill-gotten gains which we're talking about here and reinvesting it into communities is absolutely vital, and that's why in this year's budget we allocated additional funding specifically to CAB to support them in the work that they do in keeping communities safe.